The phone was ringing. It was before dawn on a January morning in 1995. The wind was at the window, whispering how far below zero it was out there. It was far below zero out there. It was my job to be out in it, to throw chemical ice melt at the doorways. Not to melt the ice, no, it was far too cold for that, but to give booted pedestrians traction when they pushed against the revolving doors and the howling wind. I fumbled for the phone in the darkness. Hello? Where are you? 3 words, punctuated with many more words my father would have marveled to learn, and he was a sailor. It was my boss, Linda Nowicki. I've changed her name, but I kept the made-up name as Polish because she had been pinched off that giant Polish sausage known as West Side Chicago. She had come marching into my life 2 years before, in 1993, as a figure cut from 20 years before, from the Irving Park neighborhood, out of one of those wonderful bowling alleys reeking of stale cigarette smoke and Miller High Life. In fact, she had a peculiar gait when she walked, because both her knees had been blown out when she played college softball back in the 70s. Her gait etched itself into everyone's memory because if you ever saw it, it meant that she had to leave the office and track you down because you hadn't been doing your job or you were somewhere you shouldn't be, leaning on a shovel instead of pushing a mower over the property of one of these faceless institutions that make up the ring around the city of Chicago. And when she found you, you heard her first, punctuating her instructions to you with language that would make the toughest gangster blush and look for a place to hide. And while she was punctuating, she would be searching the several pockets of her coveralls for the cell phone because someone was calling her. It took someone like Linda Nowicki to command a bunch of young men such as we, and she kept her hair short in an effort, I think, to look tougher. But her roommate, a drop-dead gorgeous woman named Jennifer, kept her brunette hair long so that it would fly behind her while she drove her red Mazda Miata all over town. Linda divided us men into 3 crews, each with a crew leader. I was one of 4 or 5 other young men under our crew leader, a man a year older than me named Jason. Jason was a very nice person, well-meaning, hard-working, and a conscientious crew leader, answering to Linda for us without being an overbearing boss himself. Nevertheless, he did not like me, which puzzled me at the time, seeing as how I held him in high regard and did everything he told me. Well, kind of. Linda was paying us a nickel over the minimum wage, and the work was back-breaking, tedious, and sometimes actually dangerous. So I made up my mind that if she was going to pay a nickel over the minimum wage, then I was going to give about a nickel's worth of effort to the job. I was always at break 5 minutes early, like my buddy Steve, and we always left the break room 5 minutes late. And we always, but always, every afternoon, right after the stretched afternoon break, found a task to be doing on the far side of the property so that we'd have to break it all down as early as possible, making our way back to the office as slowly as possible to clock out a few minutes late. Steve was great to be around. He was one hilarious quip after another, and he made those long, hot summer days go a little faster. His life was a pursuit of ease and comfort, and his sole purpose in life was to enjoy a few cold ones and make connections with the fairer sex. He had 2 problems, though. He was a diminutive fellow, and he had a face that looked more like a used catcher's mitt. He had some strange idea that I'd make a great wingman for him while he flew around the room in hot pursuit. I really didn't mind because he threw money on the table whenever the pitcher would empty out. and it was my job to get it filled again, which I did. Besides, I'd sworn off women after a girl hurt me a year before, so it was fun watching Steve crash and burn night after night. He always promised to get us in by 11, but he'd always forget about the extra digit in his promise, and we'd get home at 1, which made us next to useless at work until after the morning break. Well, one night, Steve met a nice young lady who seemed to be okay with the used catcher's mitt. And 1 o'clock flew by into last call. "Steve," I said, "come on, we got to get up at dawn." "Are you kidding?" he replied. "I'm almost to first base. Let's go to O'Shaughnessy's." O'Shaughnessy's was a front entrance, a place to stand, a bar, and a bathroom door. And whatever was behind it, I never wanted to find out. O'Shaughnessy's was also open all night. I calculated. I could hoof it back to the apartment in time to get a few hours of shut-eye. So rather than wait for Steve to crash and burn in the wee hours of the morning, I walked home. A few hours later, I peeled open my eyes. Steve never made it home, the poor guy. He drove straight from O'Shaughnessy's to the office, clocking in without being able to see, and he was barely able to stand. "Duke," he said, "you gotta help me out. I gotta sleep this off. We'll go on this detail by the front entrance, just me and you. And then you take off to go help the other guys, and I'll be under the shrubbery, just in case you need me. Whatever you do, don't tell Linda." Linda asked, "Where's Steve?" He said he had to go take care of something," I lied. Now, slacking off at work under a nickel over minimum wage is one thing. But lying to the boss lady didn't sit well with me. And she knew I was lying, and I knew she knew I was lying. "Find him," she said with the usual flurry of punctuation. Sure enough, Steve was curled up under the low-hanging topiary next to the "Welcome to Acme Industries" sign. Propped up against the sign were a rake and a weed whacker. So to demonstrate my displeasure with Steve, I fired up the weed whacker and started to go to work next to his head. He woke up in an unpleasant mood. My mood immediately lifted. Later, I was with Jason, the crew leader, and we were loading and unloading some tables and chairs for a conference that evening. One of the table legs got hung up in the cart, and it hurt my shoulder, so that I got a little mad, and I pushed back at this insolent, inanimate object, wrangling it with some considerable force so that it gave up the struggle and complied, lying neatly atop its fellow tables. Jason was watching. "You know, Duke," he said, "that's the first time I've ever seen you use a little effort. You got a little mad, didn't you? You have to sometimes. You have to get a little mad to get the job done. A little mad at yourself to make yourself use a little effort. You never put any muscle into any of the work." "Well, listen," I said. "If Linda wasn't always screaming at me, then maybe I do a little bit better for her." "Do a little better for her," he replied. "Maybe if you worked a little harder, Linda wouldn't always shriek at you. She's not all temper, you know. She doesn't have to keep a lazy bum like you on her work crews." Well, that fetched me. And even though he stung me a little, from then on I took up with Jason, learning a little character from him. And I showed up to work on time, watched out for leaning on the shovel for too long, for taking too long with the easy jobs, for complaining at the hard jobs, for timing every job to maximize break time, lunch time, and quitting time. Quitting on Steve was a big help, too. I showed up to work most days, rested and cheerful. And wouldn't you know, Linda promoted me to crew leader the next summer, along with the fantastic raise to 15 cents above minimum. Linda was as sweet and easy to work with as pecan pie, except for that One cold January morning in 1995, almost 2 years later, when the whole neighborhood had experienced a power bump and my alarm clock had reset itself to blinking 12 a.m. Get it? I had Linda all wrong. I was the problem, not her. I treated her like some she-ogre, and she came right back at me as a she-ogre. Jason was right. No one was forcing her to keep me on. She did it out of the kindness of her heart. This pipsqueak, who received the one talent, had God all wrong. He's the problem, not God. He treated God like some monstrous overlord, so God comes right back at him as a monstrous overlord. This is the God who created our bodies. This is the God whose only begotten Son died to redeem our bodies. This is the God whose Holy Spirit is preparing our bodies for the resurrection. No one is forcing him to give us something to do. No one is forcing him to give us gifts, both great and small, so that we can accomplish something to return to him. No, he does it out of pure love and kindness. What's the talent he gave you? Son, brother, father, grandfather, great grandfather, daughter, sister, mother, grandmother, great grandmother, citizen of this country, citizen of this state, citizen of this municipality. You are friend, you are companion, you are a boss, employee, retiree, you are a fan. At the very least, you are a member of this congregation. How many talents did he give you? Even one? One talent is a gift from heaven, my friends. What? If you make a mistake with it, will he take it from you? No, he adds to it. I promise you, Linda was way more mad at me for leaning on that shovel than she was when I broke the tractor's front loader when I overloaded it trying to get the mulching done faster. When I showed her the leaking hydraulics, she only punctuated at me a little bit. And she made sure I was the first one to use it when the new hydraulics were installed. Even though it was a Ford, I felt like I was in heaven. Good job, Dave. You get to drive the tractor. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter the joy of your master.